Hey guys, Cribbin Governor from the Gut Health Gurus podcast. I've got a background in food science and also a registered nutritionist. And today I am so honored to have this gentleman in front of me, Morley Robbins. I actually came across Morley because a mutual friend and I were having some coffee and actually it wasn't coffee, it was deuterium depleted water, for want of a better word. And because he actually refused to drink coffee at that time, but so it was deuterium depleted water. And then the root cause protocol popped up in the conversation. And this very interesting character, Morley Robbins, also popped into the conversation. And after that conversation with my friend and getting a taste for Morley's work, I went and did some research on his root cause protocol. And I thought I have to have a conversation with Morley to get it from the horse's mouth on all the stuff that he's talking about. Because I think, and he'll tell you all about it in a second, but I think copper, iron, magnesium, they're so important. And I'm a gut health man, microbiome type of focused character, and also the mitochondria. And I think Morley will tell you in a sec, but I think copper is a huge part of the mitochondrial function. So we have to dig deep into this conversation. Firstly, Morley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Crib. I'm very happy to be here. Looking forward to the repartee and the give and take. This will be a lot of fun.
Absolutely, Morley. And what I like to do at the start of all my podcasts is to get it from the horse's mouth. Who is Morley Robbins?
I'm a recovering hospital executive who has become a wellness coach, who at the tender age of, I'll be 67 in a couple weeks, have spent the last decade retooling myself and becoming a self-taught mineral expert. Never imagined that I would be doing this at this point in my life, but it's now become my passion and my purpose. I just learned yesterday that people with purpose have hope, and I do have hope because I've really been able to uncover some very interesting things. I get up every day and read from 5 a.m. till 8 o'clock, and I do that 7 days a week, and I have for 10 solid years. So I've read a lot of articles, and as you know, and as I think your listeners will soon appreciate, minerals are very, very important for the function of the body. And I think it's fascinating that there are about 9,000 minerals. 9,000 enzymes, I apologize, 9,000 enzymes. And they all work just like the cars we drive. So the reasonable conclusion would be, well, if there's 9,000 enzymes, there must be 9,000 minerals. And there's not. There's only about a handful that really run all of those 9,000 enzymes. And the key question is, when was the last time you drove your car without a key? Well, unless you're Wilma Flintstone or Fred Flintstone, it's very hard to do that. And it's hard to fathom that, like, one mineral, magnesium, has sway over 42% of our enzymes. And so when we're under stress, as most of us are, by virtue of our work schedule or our relationship dynamics or our worries about money or the diet that we tend to be focused on or whatever it happens to be, we lose minerals really fast. And you were talking about someone not wanting to drink coffee. Well, coffee is a great way to deplete your body of minerals. I mean, it's like, and if you know that, you know to replete those minerals, but most people that go to Starbucks, where I hang out, don't know that. So it's actually, it's comical to watch almost. But who am I? I'm really someone who believes that people deserve to learn how to gain health freedom so they can get medical independence. And there's a lot of information out there. I think one of the phrases that people love to ask me is, oh, what's new? And what I invariably will respond with is, well, let's talk about what's enduring, what's been around for a long time. And I think what's important for people to realize is that what I've really, like, I cut my teeth on magnesium and was fascinated by what I was reading. And then suddenly I knew why everyone was in the hospital, in those hospitals that I worked in. But of course, I thought that if you just gave them magnesium, they would perk up like a plant. Well, they don't. And my continued research got me to copper, only to discover that it's both usable and unusable, depending upon whether it's complexed with its protein, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, called ceruloplasmin. And the people who can pronounce that correctly will get a free consult. Uh, but that, knowing that there's usable and unusable copper, got me to iron. And that became a watershed event when I'd really specialized in understanding how stress caused magnesium loss. And I called it the magnesium burn rate. And we all have varying degrees of magnesium burn rate depending upon the stress level. But I was reading an article by a famed Italian researcher, iron researcher, and in the opening passage of the article, he said the greatest stress to the human body is iron stress. And suddenly it was like, boom, I went, oh my gosh, that's what the whole problem is. And I began to take this deep dive into iron. What is it? What composition does it have in our body? And what does it do with oxygen? And that's where I'm settled in now, is really understanding the dynamics of oxygen in the human body. And there are only two metals that work with oxygen. They're called redox active metals, if you want to get really stuffy about it. But iron is a weighter, and it carries oxygen. That's where 80% of your iron is in hemoglobin and myoglobin, carrying oxygen for the mitochondria that I'm sure we're going to talk about. And so we've all been to restaurants. We know what waiters are, but every really good restaurant has what? A chef. And what does the chef do? The chef activates food so it can be an experience. That's why we go to the restaurant, not the waiter. They're nice and they talk to us, but we really want to know what's the chef got up his sleeve today. And who's the chef in the mitochondria? Well, it's copper.
Wow.
Copper at complex 4 is the make or break enzyme to turn oxygen, to activate oxygen into 2 molecules of water. And when that happens, there's 3 precursor energy molecules called ADP that go over to complex 5, which is a rotor. It's called ATP synthase for the gearheads in the audience. And that rotor is spinning at 9,000 revolutions per minute. And every time it goes around a cycle, it can complete 3 magnesium hyphen ATP, because that's how the body spells it. Always puts a magnesium in the front of it. And so every second, or so every minute, we're making 27,000 ATP. Okay, that's a lot. But let's put that into perspective. Every beat of our heart requires 1 billion ATP.
Wow.
And so if we don't have enough bioavailable copper and we have too much iron, we don't make enough energy. And I think everyone in the audience can relate to feeling fatigued, relate to not feeling, like they can get through the day. And what's really important.
I'll pause you there for a sec. Are you
Sure.
able to repeat that previous phase? Because I think it's really important to get that crystallized in people's mind.
About the energy?
Yeah.
No, if you
that statistic every
beat of the heart requires 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion ATP. So So there's some big numbers that we can get into in the course of this discussion
And
to
then
give people.
magnesium, and then you mentioned something about magnesium and copper.
Yeah, well, magnesium is instrumental for complex 5 of the ATP electron transport chain, and copper rules complex 4. And complex 4 is it's called the terminal destination. I'm not sure why they don't include complex 5, but it's the terminal destination for the electrons that get attached to oxygen that then become water. Very important function in the body. And so people are always fascinated by mitochondrial dysfunction, like it's coming from Mars. It's not coming from Mars. It's coming from iron toxic bodies. And
Right.
most people think they are anemic. And what does the word anemia really mean? It means not in the blood. Iron is not in the blood. Okay, well, where is it? It's in the tissue. People think, oh, if it's not in the blood, it must be in the toilet. No, it doesn't work that way. And there's a very elaborate and very sophisticated iron recycling system in our body. So, Cribben, you and I have bodies. Average male has about, excuse me, 5,000 milligrams of iron. Average woman would be about 4,000 milligrams. And that's supporting 25 trillion red blood cells in our bodies. And every 24 hours, the body loses about 1% of its red blood cells. So 250 billion red blood cells have to be replaced every 24 hours. Well, 24 milligrams, it only takes 25 milligrams to support that, believe it or not. It's amazing. But 24 milligrams of that iron comes from the recycling system. Again, for the elite, the academics in the audience, it's called the reticuloendothelial system. It took me over a year to figure out that actually means recycling. Thank you very much. Why do they use these words? I mean, it's just crazy. But the point is 24 milligrams every 24 hours, and it's done internally. And we need 1 milligram of iron each day, only 1 milligram. And the dietary standards are, oh, you need 18 milligrams a day. Oh, you need 26 milligrams. Or I had one client from Australia who was taking 350 milligrams a day
My God.
at her doctor's direction. She was a hot mess. But the point is, the body doesn't need the level of iron as long as there's bioavailable copper to allow the iron to get out of the recycling macrophages. And those are the Pac-Men who gobble up those dying red blood cells, one of the most important jobs in the body. And the doorman that releases that iron is called copper. It's the ferroxidase enzyme function that's essential, and it allows the iron to hook onto what's called transferrin, which is a transport protein, which takes it back to the bone marrow, where the nurse cells inside the bone marrow hatch the next day's red blood cells. It's absolutely amazing, and it's elegant to really piece it together, but it's not taught in many places that I know of. And it becomes the linchpin of breakdown because so many people are told that they're anemic for all the wrong reasons. And there really are 3 ways to measure iron status in the body. Hemoglobin, we've talked about, is that's iron carrying the oxygen. And there are bazillions of hemoglobin in our body. I can't remember how big the number is, but it's enormous. And there's a second way to measure iron. It's called serum iron. And that's the iron that shows up as a result of this recycling program. And I'm going to use US units. I apologize. I should be able to convert it to international, but I don't always have command of that. But in US units, the amount of serum iron for a woman should be 100, I think it's micrograms per deciliter. And for a guy, it should be 120 micrograms per deciliter. But think of that number as miles per gallon. And again, what conventional medicine and nutrition now loves to talk about are ranges. Like, oh, your body temperature should be between 92 and 108. No, it's got to be 98.6, right? We know that. We absolutely know there's one number that determines whether we're healthy or not, whether we have a good metabolism or not this range that we could drive a Mack truck through sideways. Well, all the iron panels have these ranges that don't make any sense at all.
So I'm gonna pause you there for a second, just so
sure.
we take a bit of a breath and just summarize what we talked about, because we're going into some pretty heavy stuff. So in terms of my understanding of what you're saying,
Yeah.
we've got too much iron going on in our bodies,
Yep.
which could be causing dysfunction. Specifically, an example is in the mitochondria. Magnesium is absolutely fundamental, and it's depleted if we're too stressed. And copper is almost like this very important mineral that assists in the removal of iron from the body. Is that roughly what you're trying to say, or it's reducing the amount of iron in the body?
It's regulating.
Sure.
So a lot of people know that there are 94 minerals in the ocean. And then we know that there's 18 essential minerals. But within that 18, I've come to conclude that there's a hierarchy. And we've got to have clarity about the fact that the minerals that are working with oxygen are supremely important. So that's copper and iron. And magnesium has a relationship with oxygen, but not in a catalytic sense, or not in a reactive sense. When magnesium is not present, the chance for oxidative stress rises. But copper and iron have a very supreme role around moving oxygen and activating oxygen. And copper is the only metal on the planet that can activate oxygen and turn it into water. Absolutely the only one. And it has special properties beyond that. A lot of people are familiar with antioxidants, like vitamin A or vitamin C or vitamin E, things like that. Well, there are antioxidant enzymes that play a very instrumental role in maintaining a degree of regulation of the oxidative stress in the body. So we have reactive oxygen species. That's where the oxidative stress comes from. Oxygen is being turned into oxidants. So oxygen that has an accident is an oxidant. So we have reactive oxygen species, and we have antioxidant enzymes. These are supremely important parts of our body, and they are powered by bioavailable copper. Ding, ding, ding. So copper is activating oxygen to make energy, and it's deactivating oxidants to lower exhaust. And what happens in the human body is if the reactive oxygen species start to build, and we don't have a requisite rise in the enzymes, that's called oxidative stress. The production exceeds the elimination of oxidants. If that production rises even higher, it's called inflammation. Inflammation is stage 2 of oxidative stress. A lot of people don't know that. It's a significant amount of oxidative stress. And then there's stage 3 that is called cell death. There's so much oxidative stress and there's so little antioxidant enzymes, cell can't make it. And so then the cell is taken offline, either through apoptosis or necrosis or some other mechanism. But that hierarchy of oxidative stress was studied and very carefully delineated by two world-renowned iron biologists in England, um, Gutteridge and Hollowell. And once you understand that there's a hierarchy there, you begin to appreciate the importance of these enzymes. And you've got to be able to make more and more of these enzymes. Well, the only way to do that is to have more and more bioavailable copper.
So just to clarify my understanding, so
Sure.
reactive oxygen species, they play some form of function in the body, but then you've got these enzymes that are almost balancing out, or these
Exactly.
antioxidant enzymes that are
That's right.
balancing it out at a healthy level.
Exactly. There's always going to be, so the mitochondria are the source of 90% of the energy and 90% of the exhaust. They produce an enormous amount of oxidative, of oxidants, excuse me, in a healthy cell with healthy mitochondria. There could be a couple hundred in a cell. In the heart cells, you might have a couple thousand, but they're able to keep things in balance as long as the minerals are being sustained. That's the key. The minute you get under stress, and we all know that sensation of stress when our stomach knots up, um, that's when we start to lose minerals at a very significant rate. And maybe this is maybe a heretical thing for me to say on this show, but you're talking to a guy who does not believe in medical disease. It doesn't exist. There is stress-induced mineral dysregulation that creates metabolic dysfunction. And what do we do? That metabolic dysfunction becomes symptoms: headache, stomach ache, my joint doesn't work right, whatever, my eye isn't focusing right. And we take that bag full of symptoms into the doctor's office and we dump it on their desk. And what does the doctor do? They look it up in the Merck manual. Oh, you got this and this symptom, and say, oh, well, you have XYZ syndrome. And because we're human, we're very gullible, and we believe that. There is no disease. Once you understand redox chemistry and the function of copper and iron to manage oxygen, and that accidents do happen, there is no disease. But there is metabolic dysfunction that's a function of the stress of our lives. And it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. I have a burning question.
Yeah.
Why do you think, well, it might just be a theory as well. So why do you think that the body consumes so much magnesium when it's stressed?
There's a whole series of enzymes called kinase enzymes, and they are reacting to oxidative stress, and they're poised with um, phosphate groups. And when that phosphate group gets activated by some stressor, it could be heat stress, oxidative stress, some other, maybe heavy metal stress, the kinase enzyme it changes its structure, and magnesium is lost in that transaction.
Right.
And phosphate is given off as a source of energy to respond to that stress.
And it could be purely just speculative, but do you think if we're pushing the body into almost a parasympathetic state, kind of fight or flight, the body's almost prepping for this big burst of energy or something like that?
Oh yeah, and again, so there's we have a central nervous system, and then we have an autonomic nervous system, or some people like to call it the automatic. And that autonomic system is ruled by the electrolytes. And so we have a sympathetic on and a parasympathetic relaxed. And we as a species, we're designed to be 90% parasympathetic. Well, that's not modern society. Modern society has flipped that. So now we're 90% sympathetic. And how do you turn on the sympathetic nervous system? You gotta have calcium. calcium will turn it on faster than anything else. How do you turn it off? Magnesium. How do you turn on the parasympathetic nervous system? Potassium will turn it on. And what will stop potassium in its tracks? Sodium. So what kind of a diet do most people eat in the world? A very calcium rich with lots of salt, and they never think about it. And so they've got this always on sympathetic system where the parasympathetic is blocked. And where do a lot of people get their meals? Fast food, drive-through. Well, and what our ancestors would be shocked to see how we eat today, that we don't take the time to relax, have communion, have conversation, allow the food to digest. Well, that we don't have time for that. You know, I've got clients that take pride in the fact that they, on the way to work, they're putting on their makeup, listening to the news, checking emails, and talking to someone at the same time. And they think
Okay.
that's normal. Well, that's activating the sympathetic nervous system, which is causing a massive loss of magnesium.
My apologies. I think I might have confused the two. So,
Oh, that's okay.
is
Yeah,
the sympathetic one is the overly stressed one, and then the
that's right.
parasympathetic is the more relaxed
Exactly.
state.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
So
Yep.
what you're saying is because you've got a lot of these minerals like sodium, calcium, almost regulating these responses or involved in these responses, that we're pushing it almost chemically to one direction versus the other.
Absolutely. And the reason why magnesium is so important is that it has a relationship with the other three electrolytes. There are three hormones that regulate calcium levels. There's calcitonin coming out of the thyroid. There's parathyroid hormone coming out of the parathyroid. And then there's hormone D, which we're being trained is just a vitamin, when in fact it's not. It's the oldest hormone on the planet, and it's the most powerful hormone in our body. But all three of those, they're called calcitropic hormones. They regulate calcium levels, respond to magnesium status. And if magnesium's not right, the management of calcium is not right. And what people need to know is that if their calcium level in their blood work shows either high or low, it's a sign of not enough magnesium in the body. That's an established physiological fact. And magnesium has sway over sodium, and it influences the level of potassium in the body. So it has a magical position as it relates to managing the autonomic nervous system, and that's why it's so critical for managing stress in general.
So in layman's terms, firstly, we've got to have for optimal health, have some form of stress management practice, so we're
Yeah,
not depleting magnesium from the body. And then the second part of that story is having enough magnesium through the diet or something
absolutely.
like that.
Or to even supplement with it to make sure that you're getting enough. And the best definition of stress that I've ever heard is by a physician here in the States. Many of your listeners probably know Mark Hyman. He's written many books.
Sure. Yeah.
And he has a wonderful definition of stress, which is stress is the body's inability to make energy for the mind to perceive its environment or
Wow.
to respond to its environment. It's a really powerful, it connects the body and mind, connects energy. And so if we aren't able to make energy, we get stressed out. And if there's too much iron in our mitochondria, we can't make energy. And the impact can be 20% loss of energy, 40%, 60%, 96% loss of energy. I've seen 5 different studies, 5 different levels of impact. And what people need to understand is that there's a German iron researcher, his name is escaping me right now. I think it was Schultz, but I'd have to verify that. But in 2001, he wrote a very important paper where he made it very clear that the iron that's being added to the food system that started back in the Second World War in England and Canada and the US, but in 1941, they started adding iron filings, not organic iron, iron filings, but that iron immediately goes to the mitochondria. Most people don't know that. And what's important to understand about the mitochondria is it's the terminal destination for oxygen and iron. And if the mitochondria can't manage that oxygen and can't manage that iron, that's the very origin of metabolic dysfunction, because energy production goes down. And when that happens, think of it as a bell-shaped curve. When the pH of the cell is at 7, you have optimal energy production. Things are humming, everything's great. pH is 7, we're right where we need to be, everything's good. But if you come off of that optimal on either side of acid or base, the energy production goes down. The frequency of the cell goes down. And when the frequency of the cell goes down, there goes the electric fence keeping the pathogens out. As soon as that frequency of the cell changes, that's when the pathogens wake up. And that's the work of Jerry Tennant, who's a physician here in the US. He's over in Dallas, Texas. And his book is called Healing is Voltage. It's a really powerful paradigm. But that's the essence of it, is if we can't make optimal energy, we can't have optimal health. And it requires minerals to make that happen.
What do you mean when you say frequency, Morley?
Well, again, we are energy and light beings.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you're producing energy, there's going to be a vibration to that energy. There's going to be a, if you will, a hum. We can't hear it, we can't feel it, but the energy workers around the world know exactly what we're talking about right now. And if there's just a minor change in that vibration in our tissue, pathogens wake up. They like, like it's again Cribbin, it's tied to the pH. Think we know that pH stands for potential for hydrogen. It's really the potential for energy. It's really what it stands for. But think of spelling frequency. Instead of starting with the first letter F, make it a pH. P-H-R-E-Q-U-E-N-C-Y. And that's a different way of thinking about pH. There's a different vibration at the pH of 1 than there is at the pH of 14. That's another way to look at it.
Okay, so we've unpacked iron. So iron is coming from food, like people adding iron to the food. So we've got too much iron. So just to recap, now what is too much iron doing?
Too much iron will get stuck in the recycling macrophages. So to give people a sense of where they are, 80% of the macrophages are in our liver, and there are macrophages all over our body. They start out in circulation, and they're called monocytes, and then they take up residence in tissue, and they're called macrophages. And they are incredibly intelligent beings. They have incredible awareness of their environment. They're the first responders to infection. They respond to inflammation. They're in a position where they can go from what's called M1 function, which is an inflammatory response or a response to infection to try to kill the pathogen, and they can flip to what's called M2 response, which is wound repair. Well, when you understand the chemistry of responding to a pathogen, which is completely different than the chemistry of wound repair, and only an intelligent tissue and only intelligent cells can manage that. And they are very dependent on copper for their work, and they're working with iron, especially the recycling macrophages are working with iron all the time. So when it gets stuck, when iron gets stuck, it creates oxidative stress. A mitochondria, when we're in complex 4 of the mitochondria, we're turning oxygen into water. Well, it's a 2-step engine. The first step turns oxygen into hydrogen peroxide. So we're going from O2 to H2O2. And then there's a second step to complete the cycle and turn H2O2 into 2 molecules of water. So we basically have 2 H2O, so we have 4 hydrogen and 2 oxygen. If that mitochondria can't complete the cycle, it's going to put out too much hydrogen peroxide, and that's called inflammation. Hydrogen peroxide is synonymous with inflammation. It's also synonymous with hypoxia. People have heard that term, and hypoxia does not mean absence of oxygen. It means lack of availability of molecular oxygen. And if that molecular oxygen keeps being turned into hydrogen peroxide because the cycle is stuck, that's called inflammation. And people don't know the chemistry of it, but it's very, very significant. And what's a great way to create hydrogen peroxide? Ascorbic acid, vitamin D supplements, sugar. These are the things that are so very destructive in our daily diet.
And on a side note there, I mean, those are really common food additives, isn't it? Or
Absolutely.
supplements. And
Yeah.
the other interesting thing, Morley, is that hydrogen peroxide is one of the most common antibiotic agents used in the food industry. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine, I mentioned, if the body is under inflammation, producing all this hydrogen peroxide, that is killing microbes potentially in the gut as well.
Absolutely. No question about it.
So
Absolutely true.
that could be. I also hypothesized this a while ago, but hydrogen peroxide is very common when you have things like allergies as well. Like they've
Absolutely.
detected elevated levels of hydrogen peroxide, which leads me to believe that maybe this could be a mechanism for dysbiosis in the gut as well. If your body's spitting out these
Absolutely.
antimicrobial agents, and it's going to knock out a lot of bacteria in the gut. So
Well, let me take a quick sidestep to explain what I think will come back to support what you're saying.
yeah,
So we live on a planet that's been around, some would argue, for billions of years. And let's just accept that premise for now. So the Earth supposedly started about 4.5 billion years ago. It's a long time. I have no idea how they clock this. I mean, it's like at some point you just have to accept. But
sure.
but the Earth had no oxygen when it started, and for several billion years there was no oxygen. And then mysteriously, phytoplankton in the ocean started splitting water and created oxygen. And it's called the Great Oxygen Event. And when that happened, when the level of oxygen built up on the planet to such a degree, 2.45 billion years ago, again, why did they put this decimal point in? But they did. So it's called the Great Oxygen Event. When that happened, 99% of life disappeared because it was anaerobic. It was living on iron. Iron was the source of electrons in an anaerobic environment. So when that did happen, 3 things emerged simultaneously on the planet. Copper, because you got to work with this oxygen thing. Secondly, a very important enzyme family called multi-copper oxidases. And these are the class of enzymes that turn oxygen into water. And so that complex 4 in our mitochondria is part of that class of enzymes, very important. And the third thing that emerged, something called cholesterol. It goes all the way back to the beginning of time.
Wow.
It takes 11 molecules of oxygen, 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. So what is cholesterol? It's an oxygen sink in a body that can't metabolize oxygen. Mother Nature's pretty smart. Now, why did I bring that up? Because in our gut, to your point, Cribben, are over 1,000 different bacteria that express multi-copper oxidases that turn oxygen into water and allow our gut flora to work properly. And that's a really important part of our digestive system that nobody talks about.
And raw.
All these bacteria that express this critical enzyme to give us energy or to enable energy to be produced. So it's fascinating, and I'm excited that you're very mindful of that as part of your work that you do and in the discussions you have with people around the world.
Totally. And if you look at I'm not sure you've ever come across the work of Jim Khalil on the quantum biology side of things, but according to their work, the things that they talk about is enzymes almost being the precursors of life. So that's in total agreement to what you're talking about almost like this evolutionary pathway of how multicellular organisms formed. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff, what you're saying.
There's two ways to describe the dynamic between minerals and enzymes. Minerals allow enzymes to work, and there's a whole group of people who feel that enzymes enable minerals to work. And again, you're getting into quantum physics. Well, most medicine and most nutrition is at a Newtonian level. Big particles, we can touch it, we can feel it, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, what runs the human body is quantum mechanics, quantum energy, and that's the energy of minerals. Only minerals can bring that kind of electron movement, and that's completely lost on a lot of conventional practitioners.
Totally. And I think over the coming decades, we'll see a shift of that because there is a groundswell of work happening in the quantum biology space, and which will lead to quantum doctors and quantum medicine. I'm sure people listening back 5 years later will probably think, well, these guys are crazy. But I think it's all coming. It's all definitely coming because, the laws of physics also apply in biology, and people separate chemistry, biology, physics, but those are the fundamental laws of nature. You can't have one without the other. So the quantum realm, the very small particles, have a huge part to play.
Yeah, and what I really try to do in my work and in the teachings that I do and what I write about, I really emphasize. You asked the question, who is Morley? What Morley's trying to do is bring people back to the very essence of what is it like to have life on this planet. And if we can't properly manage oxygen, we got a problem. And so we've got to be able to activate it or deactivate it. And what happens, to your point about hydrogen peroxide, it's a very long-lasting oxidant. It can go anywhere in the body it wants to go. It can go across every membrane that's possible. But when hydrogen peroxide mixes with iron, we have an explosion. It's called the Fenton reaction. And then what gets created is called the hydroxyl radical. It's an OH group that's really grumpy, and it's the most destructive biomolecule on the planet.
Wow.
And it only happens when you've got hydrogen peroxide and iron playing not so nicely together. And it's very common in the body because it causes dings to DNA. It causes proteins to be changed, and it causes something called the carbonylation. It's like, what the heck is that? It's a defective function in the cell is what it is. the carbons are being altered because of the presence of the hydroxyl radical.
Sure. Look, Morley, time is flown by so fast. It was such a fascinating conversation. If you wouldn't mind, I've got a couple more questions. I know your time
Oh,
is very
absolutely.
precious.
No, happy to do it.
I think we need to cover off copper in more depth. I think people now get the importance of iron and having too much iron in the body and what it's doing. Now,
Yep.
what's the copper story? Like, why don't we have enough copper to keep iron in check, to regulate it?
It's great question. Especially for Aussies, you guys should be freaked out about how little copper you have in your soil. When I really got into this, I was thinking, okay, so people down under, the minerals should be falling down, right? And they should collect in the Australian continent, but they don't seem to do that. Although our favorite form of minerals is from Australia. They're called Aussie minerals, bottled over in Perth. But what's happened is farming practices have gotten in the way. Um, People are familiar with NPK, it blocks copper absorption. Uh, then we've got the introduction of, I guess I would call it modern warfare farming, with the introduction of Roundup and GMO products. Well, one of the things that I learned from Stephanie Seneff, scientist that many of your listeners probably are familiar with, I was at a meeting in Chicago, April a year ago, and we were at a breakfast table, and she said, Morley, would you like to know why Roundup is so dangerous for copper? And I went, yes. Well, it turns out that Roundup will chelate copper down to a pH of 1.
Ah,
Our stomach acid is 2. So what does that mean? It means that Roundup can take copper out of any living organism without any resistance. So it's taking the copper out of the soil, out of the plants, out of the animals, and out of the humans eating the plants and the animals. So
right.
it's becoming a very serious threat to our survival and our copper status. There are there was a team of Swedish physiologists, Holmberg and Laurel, who discovered this ceruloplasmin protein in 1948. It was the first article they wrote about it. And in that article, in the second paragraph, they talk about how ascorbic acid is very destructive to this copper protein. Now, the difficulty that we're going to have in this conversation as we go forward is most people have never heard of the protein, and they're like, yeah, how serious can it be? How important could it be? And it's a really serious part of our anatomy. It's the biggest protein in the human body. It has 8 copper atoms inside it. There's no other protein like that. And I'm at the point of, I've reached 25 different functions that this protein can express. So one gene produces one protein, but it can do 25 different things in the body. Most of them directed at stopping iron-induced oxidative stress. And so ascorbic acid is a major um, destroyer of ceruloplasmin. Well, so is sugar, so is insulin, so are antibiotics, so are birth control pills. And there's a whole series of medications now that I think, maybe inadvertently, but they have the ability to destroy this protein. And then we've got copper coming out of that protein. And to an untrained practitioner, they call it unbound copper, and it's toxic. It's not toxic. It's just unbound, and it can be rebound. And so there's the social meme on this planet now is that we are anemic and we are copper toxic. And so there's a whole class of actions that practitioners recommend. Coffee enemas, take molybdenum, the number, take as much ascorbic acid as you can, because ascorbic acid will block the absorption of copper. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are many different strategies that are used to try to get rid of this unbound copper. And it's incredibly destructive to our metabolism, because then we're faced with oxygen that can't be activated or oxidants that can't be deactivated. And I'm like, this is not taught in practitioner school. I mean, in your training, Cribben, how many times did they use the word ceruloplasmin in class?
Not once.
Yeah. And so again, people say, well, who's this bloke from the States? What is he talking about? And I mean, how can I trust him? Well, go on the Magnesium Advocacy Facebook group, go to the rcp123.org website and knock your socks off. We've got 82 articles about it. I've got over 100 videos talking about this. And it's just, it's amazing that this isn't the cornerstone of practitioner training, but it's not. And we know why it's not, because there's no money in a cure. And that's really what ceruloplasmin is. It's the solution to what ails us. And so copper has been demonized. Copper has been processed out of foods. Like, why do you think they have refined wheat? Gets rid of the minerals, gets rid of the vitamin E that's so important, gets rid of a lot of things. So, and then we have, people probably know about high fructose corn syrup. I don't think you use it down under as much as we do here in the States.
Not as much.
But what high fructose corn syrup does is it blocks a key import protein in our gut, getting back to gut dysbiosis, and it's called CTR1, copper transporter 1, and high fructose corn syrup shuts it down. So copper can't get in the body. Well, if copper can't get in the body, if it can't get in the gut, you're going to have gut issues, because what keeps, if these are the enterocytes of the gut, what keeps them stuck together? It's called energy. What enables them to have energy? Copper, thank you very much. And it's amazing that this lowly little mineral, we were talking about 5,000 milligrams of iron. Well, all we need to have a healthy body is 90 milligrams of copper. So that's a 60-to-1 ratio. Think about that. So for every copper atom, there's 60 atoms of iron that need to be regulated. That's how powerful and how intelligent copper is. And by working through that protein ceruloplasmin that has 8 coppers inside it, it's keeping track of about 500 atoms of iron. That's something to be very grateful for, that we have that capacity in our body.
I've got to unpack one thing, one burning question, and before we move on to how to get more copper in the diet, which I think is fundamental. Now, ascorbic acid's a really interesting one because people often get confused with vitamin C and ascorbic acid. Now, ascorbic acid is one of the most commonly used food additives on the planet. Like if you look at tomato paste or tomato sauce or anything that needs an antioxidant to give something more vibrancy in its color, commonly they'll be using ascorbic acid. And it's confusing because then people say, oh, we need more vitamin C to boost our immune system. Vitamin C is good for mitochondrial function. So it's really confusing. So how do we differentiate between real vitamin C and ascorbic acid, or are they both bad in terms of that copper iron story?
So the origin of the confusion goes back to the 1930s. Albert Szent-Györgyi, who got the Nobel Prize in 1937 for that work. He was actually studying hyaluronic acid, which is involved in wound repair. And then he started studying hexauronic acid. They sound the same, don't they? Hyaluronic, hexauronic. And lo and behold, he gets the Nobel Prize for hexauronic acid, which is another way of saying ascorbic acid. But his real passion was hyaluronic acid. So we've got ascorbic acid and then what's called the whole food vitamin C complex. So let's look at it in terms of a car. So the whole C complex is like your car. It has an engine and a steering wheel and four wheels and then a shell covering it. That's the vitamin C complex. Ascorbic acid is the shell of the car and no moving parts. And if people knew that one company, Hoffman Roche, makes 90% of the ascorbic acid from GMO corn and sulfuric acid,
Oh,
you may
God.
not be so excited to use ascorbic acid, especially when you begin to understand more about ceruloplasmin. And Cribben, you're absolutely right. It's ubiquitous in the food industry. Do you think that's an accident? I don't know. Let's just say it was an accident. It's a very destructive accident.
Mm.
And it has a devastating effect on the structure of this protein. And when it gets tweaked, when the ceruloplasmin gets tweaked, coppers leak out. And then we have unbound copper that we can attack. And that's where a lot of the confusion is. So people need to know that there are sources of this vitamin C complex. We, the the folks at Ancient Minerals they have a wonderful form um, made from, is it Kaduka plums or
Oh, Kakadu. Oh,
Kakadu,
I gotcha. Yep, something like Kakadu Plum or Gabinji, I think is the Aboriginal
right?
word. And also
Yep,
Camu Camu is amazing for
yep,
bioavailable natural
absolutely.
vitamin C from a plant.
So people need to stay away from ascorbic acid and ascorbate because they're derivatives of each other. And so it's very important that that engine inside the vitamin C complex is an enzyme, and it's called tyrosinase. And tyrosinase is a three-sided pyramid with copper at all 4 points. And that vitamin C complex is delivering copper to the body. It's a very, very important function that vitamin C in its natural state, in its intended state, provides to our tissue.
Wow, that's incredible. So hopefully people get it now. You know, certainly I'm one of these people who are very unaware of this information. I'll be making some changes in my own regime and certainly going back to using food sources of vitamin C like Camu Camu or Kakadu Plum.
I find in these conversations, Cribben, it takes 3 or 4 conversations to really, as you say, unpack it. And so I know what's going to happen. Your listeners are going to go wild with questions. And so happy to come back when it's convenient for you, just to make sure people fully understand this dynamic, because this is a parallel universe of natural healing that is in conflict with what people think is conventional healing, which isn't based on what the dynamics that we're talking about.
Totally. And I really wanted to get into root cause protocol, but we've totally run out of time. So if you wouldn't mind coming back for round
No,
2, just to
absolutely.
go through
Right.
root cause protocol in depth. It's an amazing system that you've developed to address a lot of these issues that we're talking about with excess iron and getting more copper into the diet and various other strategies that you have. But
Yeah.
Morley,
Happy
how
to.
about we wrap up there? We'll start to wrap. Now, firstly, I want to give you the opportunity to. I'm sure there's going to be so many people that want to connect with you after this conversation and ask you more questions. So, firstly, how
That's
do
fine.
people actually find you?
Um, I have a Facebook group called the Magnesium Advocacy Group. Uh, there is a website. It's rcp123.org, and you can go to that website and you can download the protocol. You just have to provide your email address, and then you'll get access to the protocol. Then what usually freaks out hosts of these programs is when I give my email address. It's my first and last name, Morley Robbins @gmail.com. And then just to give you a heart attack, Cribben, I give out my phone number.
Oh my
It's
God.
It's area code 847-922-8061. For the folks down under, you have to put a 01 in front of that. And I get calls from Australia all the time, so I'm not troubled by that. I figure the people who really need to get a hold of me will be very judicious about reaching out, and I'm very happy to take the time to talk with them and answer their questions. So again, I'm a man on a mission. I have absolute conviction that this is a very powerful and very fundamental way of bringing the body back into balance based on the principles of Mother Nature. People like to say, Morley's the man behind the root cause protocol. And I say, well, actually, Mother Nature is the woman behind the root cause protocol. I stole it from her. It's just, I dusted it off with some research, and it's amazing how effective it can be in helping people regain and rebalance their bodies.
And totally, if there's one thing, Morley, if someone can do to improve their gut health, because it is the Gut Health Gurus podcast, and just your top recommendation to improve gut health, what would it be?
I think that where a lot of people get into trouble is this diet versus that diet. I think what's important is an ancestral diet, go back to the basics. And I think a lot of people who have gut issues, and I mean, I say this with the greatest respect with your followers, but anyone I've ever worked with who has gut issues also has an unresolved emotional issue that they haven't dealt with, and there's something that they can't stomach. And what I've learned over the last decade is that every physical dynamic in our body starts with some unresolved emotional issue. So I would encourage people to go back to the basics in your diet, eat real food, eat food that your ancestors would recognize, eat food in season, but deal with your issues that are the origin of the dysregulation in your gut. And I'm very well versed in gene issues, very well versed in metabolic issues, but at the very base of it is some unresolved emotional issue that really needs to be attended to. And I'm a big fan of emotional freedom technique. There's Bowen technique. There's emotion code, but these are proven modalities to help people bring that dynamic under control so they can resolve the physical issues as well.
Totally, Morley. 100% agree. For me, in my own journey with gut dysfunction and depression, anxiety, which I struggled with for practically my whole life, the key thing was exactly what you're talking about. And my journey was actually taking up an acting technique called the Meisner technique, which is almost a form of cognitive behavior therapy. So 100%
That's awesome.
Agree. Yeah. So we definitely resonate with what you're saying, Morley.
No, that's great. That's beautiful. And so people need to know that if they have anxiety, if they have gut dysbiosis, they got too much iron in their system. It's an absolute lock.
Wow.
And that means there's not enough copper to regulate the iron that's creating the oxidative stress that's causing the gut dysbiosis. So we can talk about that maybe the next time we get together.
Absolutely. Morley Robbins, thank you so much for being so generous with your time.
Absolutely.
And huge appreciation. You have yourself a great day.
And you as well. Enjoy, as I like to say, enjoy your tomorrow.
Awesome.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you, Morley. Take care.